transition, and hopefully we're now live, and we've got a few people online.
Yep, we're going live. We should be good.
Cool. So, welcome to those who have joined us. My name's Phil Duncalf, and I've been setting up this project called the Hell Project, basically to discuss what hell is, what the Bible says about it. I believe the Bible is our authority, and so I make quite a few assumptions based on that. If you want to look at the biblical authority and why we trust it, I'd suggest Michael Jones's channel. He's got loads of stuff about the Bible and why we can trust it and why Christianity is good news as well as a trustworthy worldview. And so highly recommend his channel. It's such a pleasure to have you on this channel, Michael. And we're just going to talk about what you're doing with Inspiring Philosophy and your video particularly, which was the one where you asked the question, does God send people to hell? But ultimately, just this is the first time we've met. This is the first conversation we've had, so I'd love to hear a little bit about you. What's your story, first of all? How did you get started with videos and Inspiring Philosophy?
Well, I mainly got started with the videos because there was a lot of atheist videos on YouTube, as I'm sure you're aware. It's like their territory almost at this point.
Yep.
And I was like, there's not a lot of good Christian responses. I'll do about 13 or 14 videos, and that should help. And then I'll call it quits.
Right.
And then I did a couple. I did those, and then people asked me to do some more. And so I did some more, and then it just kept snowballing, and that's how I got started. So I mean, it kind of just took off on its own, I guess you could say.
Nice. And so with that, what's your vision now? So when was that where you started? How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing it for so about 7 years now. So I started in 2011 with a video on the Trinity, which I then redid. So I started there. So it's been about 7 years now, and I finally am full time.
Topic.
Oh yeah, the easy stuff. Trinity. That's why I had to redo the video, because I said some heretical things in there that I needed to change.
Right.
Oh yeah.
That's the joys of being online, and I'm sure I'm in danger of saying some heretical things, and we'll have to change some videos, having just started out on this channel myself. But that's why we're here. That's why we're discussing it.
Everyone's saying we're getting a bad echo from me somehow in the chat.
From you.
They say there's a reverb.
Right, hold on.
So it might...
Oh, that's turned you right down. Let me try the channels. There's bad echo. Right.
You gotta mute your desktop audio.
Ah, thanks.
You gotta mute your desktop audio, apparently.
Is that better? Give it a couple seconds to... Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no worries. That should work.
Right.
That's better,
Okay. Noob. Right. Cool. So hopefully you understood enough of what we were saying. So you're doing it for 7 years, and then you've now started doing debates and things, haven't you?
Oh yeah. I might be debating Matt Dillhunty in January.
Okay.
I'm still trying to debate Michael Shermer.
Oh yeah, I saw about that.
That still hasn't been set up. I don't even know if it is going to be set up, because I keep bothering them and I never hear anything back.
Right.
So I don't know what's going on with that.
Okay, cool. And so that's it. In terms of like your ministry, and you're doing this full time, how much are you weighting towards debating, preparing for debates? How much videos, or is it just whatever comes up first?
Well, videos are primary. That's what people are donating for.
Okay.
That's what I need to focus on mostly. The debates are second. That's why I don't do that many debates.
Right.
So sometimes I'm scheduling stuff out now to like May. You luckily was able to schedule just in time before like the truckload of different things came up.
Amazing.
So, but now people are asking me to do hangouts and debates. I'm scheduling back to May now.
Right.
Because I don't want to do too many debates, because I'll get bogged down. I won't be able to do videos, because I want to spend a lot of time preparing for those. So, I'm basically, kind of doing as minimal amount of debates as I can, but I still like doing them, so I'm going to keep doing them.
I enjoyed the 20 years from, what was it, Aaron Ra? That's meme quality right there. I did enjoy that one.
That's one of the things you just got to let play out, and you're like,
good,
keep going. I like it.
No, it's great. It's good stuff. So I really enjoy all that. Obviously, we're here to talk about your video on hell. Now, there might be some people who haven't seen it, but also just in terms of people watching this later on, if you are asked, does God send people to hell, and you've got like an elevator conversation, so only a few minutes to talk about it, how would you explain it or summarize that video?
Right. I mean, I could summarize it basically up in like a C.S. Lewis quote, just to clarify. I mean, I don't really talk a lot about ontology of hell. I talk more about the psychology of hell. I'm very agnostic on ontology and stages and all that type of stuff that happens after. And a lot of people don't seem to miss that point, so I want to clarify that.
Okay.
But if I had like an elevator pitch to give somebody on hell, it would be like, God doesn't send people to hell. Hell is a freely chosen identity built on something else besides God. And I quote C.S. Lewis, in the long run, those who reject the doctrine of hell, it is itself a question. What are you asking God to do? To wipe out past sins and give them a fresh start? Well, he did on Calvary. To forgive them? They don't want to be forgiven. To leave them alone? That's what hell is. There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done. And those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done.
Okay.
All that are in hell choose it.
Yeah. And I can never remember which book that's from. There's similar tones.
It's a mix.
Yeah.
It's a mix of a couple.
Yeah, and there's that similar tone from The Great Divorce, and So I've come across that kind of line of thinking quite a lot, and actually that's quite an evangelical Christian standard discussion about hell. Someone asks, how does a loving God send people to hell? We go to C.S. Lewis, and I've read quite a few books like that. Just in terms of your video, you started straight off with Luke 16.
Right.
And you said, so if I'm getting you correctly, so you're saying you're pretty agnostic about the difference between Hades and Gehenna? Is that?
Yeah, I actually get a kind of, it's mainly theology nerds that bring it up, to be fair. But I mean, like, when I talk about hell, I don't define hell, especially in that video, I do not define it as like this difference from Hades. I'm defining hell generally as just separation from God.
Okay.
And I thought that was clear because at one point in the video I say, I think I'm quoting Peter Kreeft, and I say that the damned will say they've always been in hell, whereas we would say we've always been in heaven, because heaven is not just a place, it's unity with God, it's being with God. So I would say I'm in heaven now, and someone who is rejecting God is in hell now. So I'm not defining hell. When people talk about Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, hell, I'm using it as basically a catch-all phrase as the average person would understand it. Just separation from God, especially in the afterlife. In that video, when I talk about hell, I'm not referring to some sort of difference from Hades.
Right.
Because the video is mainly for non-believers.
Yeah.
And non-believers don't care about those distinctions. So when theology nerds get on me for saying, well, actually, there's a difference, we're on different pages.
Okay. So with that, do you think there's a danger when you're making videos for non-Christians that they will assume, in Dante's Inferno, for example, images of torture, the sort of videos that are very culturally around hell, like do you feel there's a danger in Christians not being accurate if we don't use the terminology that is in the Bible?
Well, the question, of course, is, what do you mean by that? Could you clarify a little bit more? And also, someone in the chat said, can you turn my audio up?
Yep. Sorry, I think that was when I was filling about. Is that better? Hopefully that's better.
Sure, probably it's better, but yeah, could you clarify a little bit more about your question, though?
So where I'm coming from is I would probably have held a very similar view to you, partly because I'm a Tim Keller geek, and really enjoy his books. and I think there's quite a few themes both that he shares with CS Lewis, but also share with your video. And so I'd say I've moved from that view to a desire to be accurate with what the biblical language says. So in terms of I don't know Greek, I don't know Hebrew, I don't know Aramaic. I'm very much reliant on people to translate for me. But when there's a very interesting difference between the background of something like Hades and the background of Gehenna, they do seem to me to be very different locations, different places, different images. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking to a non-Christian and you just use the hell as a catch-all, do you think there's a danger in not being accurate enough and presenting what the biblical language is?
No, let me tell you why very simply. It's because I'm not talking about the ontology of hell. I'm talking about the psychology of hell. The whole video is on the psychology of hell, not the ontology of hell. And that's what I think some people are misunderstanding with it, is that what I'm trying to explain is why is God just not saving everyone? I'm not talking about what God is going to do, because I'm quite agnostic on that. I'm talking about what we do to ourselves. And so I think a lot of the language with regards to the afterlife is like trying to explain tennis to an ant. That's what God is doing. He's trying to, the afterlife is probably 10 times more complex than what we are aware of. And so when people go through and they say, well, first this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen. I mean, you might be right. I don't care. What I think the main point of what the Bible is getting at is trying to explain, you're going to destroy yourself through your own sin, and that's going to create hell, as I'm defining it. So the video is about the psychology of hell, because it's more of a warning.
Yeah.
So we could get into the whole nerdy differences there, but I mean, that's never really been my focus. I don't care about that. When I'm talking about hell, it means you are separating yourself from God. You're setting yourself up as your own Lord and Master, and that's going to create an eternal fire inside of you that will disintegrate you until you're nothing.
Okay.
If that eventually leads to annihilationism, if that's eternal torment, I'm agnostic about both of those positions. I don't really care, and I thought my video was kind of compatible with both. I do say forever sometimes in the video, but I mean, I didn't think, I was sort of just passing over briefly because I was really trying to focus more on the psychology.
Okay.
And to be fair, I mean, the word on the Old Testament for forever, olam, is also used to not actually mean literally forever. So I'm in good company with that then.
Yeah, I think that there is a debate over forever. I generally don't debate words like that because, as I said, my experience of Greek and everything is a little bit limited. What I do try and do is stick to biblical language, though, where it's a little bit more plain. And do you not think, though, if we've got a difference, rather than leaving it broad? So I mean, I personally may well have read into your video the view of eternal torment. I think that's because of the language of this like disintegration. Because C.S. Lewis, although he might not use eternal torment, he kind of says you'll gradually disappear or become smaller and smaller.
And when I actually read C.S. Lewis, I thought he may have even been an eventual annihilationist. That maybe hell is God sort of like exiles people, and then they slowly disintegrate into nothing. And again, so agnostic about that. I don't care.
Right.
And I think it's funny to me is that it's the theology nerds that were reading that into the video I keep hearing from. But when non-believers talk to me about my video on hell, they seem to understand it just fine.
Yeah.
That should tell you who the video is really aiming to try to talk to.
Yeah, I think I'm just wary of being called. I mean, I am a theology nerd, I guess, but in that I'm a practical theology nerd. In that my theology must lead me to love God more, to love my neighbor more, and as I learn about God, that's the outcome. Is that my digging into the Bible must not be just for my head knowledge, but for understanding who God is, His character, His love, and also His judgment and justice. And so what I find interesting about being agnostic about the two is it raises the question of, well, is God just in terms of eternal torment? And it might be a debate where I mean, people are clearly responding to your video, so I don't want to knock that. People are coming to Christ, people through your channel. But what I found a little bit confusing, I guess I'll just be honest with the two, is you've internalized consuming fire, and so there's your language was very much, as you reject God, that will start setting a fire in your soul that will gradually consume you and maybe disintegrate you. So if we're eventually disintegrated, I guess we would no longer exist in that way. But then you pulled in the orthodox. You quoted a fairly large section of the orthodox view, which was very much God's love is the consuming fire, and it will be experienced by a sinner as destruction, and it will be experienced by the righteous as love. So I was just wondering, do you see a little bit of an issue with that? Because I find those two views not necessarily as compatible, at least with the phrase consuming fire.
I don't see why, because it's really about how the person is responding to God in itself. Like, it's more psychological. It's the person is creating a fire in themselves by setting themselves up their own master, and then when God tries to love them, they interpret that in horrible ways because God is threatening their kingdom, their own lordship. And so that could be disintegrating as well. I mean, I don't really see that as much. I don't see why there would be tension there, because it still is how it's affecting the person internally.
Okay, right, I got you there. So maybe it's a question of emphasis, I guess. So where we go, I probably wouldn't now argue, or at least make it the priority, that we send ourselves to hell. Partly because of the Old Testament. And there is an active judgment of God throughout the Old Testament, and then the language that Jesus uses, so Gehenna, references back to the Old Testament. And I think if we set up it's ourselves sending ourselves to hell, it no longer becomes God's judgment, but almost like a judgment on ourselves.
Well, kind of, but let's dive into that a little bit. So let's ask for the simple question. It's like, so what are the wages of sin?
Death.
Yeah, exactly. It's not eternal torment.
Yeah.
So God punishes in certain ways, but he doesn't have to, keep torturing people. I would never say that. The way God tends to execute judgment, and there are other circumstances, especially for believers, but because, he's also trying to do more with believers. But the way God tends to, execute judgment is through death, physical death, and exile. And I'm saying that's all hell is.
Okay.
These people have rejected God. They die from their sin, obviously, and they don't want to be in his presence. God exiles them. Same thing he did to Adam and Eve. Exiled them from his presence because they wanted to be their own lords, their own masters in the garden. So they're exiled. My argument is that simply is what hell is that God is sort of just exiled these people, and then they slowly disintegrate. Now, God, I believe, is omnipresent. He is still there. He wants people to return to him, but those people interpret these sort of loving requests, these sort of loving urges as painful, as hurtful. And so, 2 Thessalonians 1:9, they will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. So it sounds almost like, and again, there's interpretation there, I agree, but it sounds almost like exile. They're being sent away. They're being exiled away. Could it be annihilationism? Sure. Could it be eternal separation? Sure. But I think it's more about the psychological implications of what's happening there.
That's really interesting. So in some ways, there's a lot of agreement here, which I find fascinating. So
let me just interject with this thing.
Yeah,
when I first uploaded the video, some annihilationist started messaging me on Facebook. He's like, "You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong." And I talked to him. I was like, "Okay, calm down. Here's what I said. Here's what I actually said." And again, I'm not against annihilationism.
Right.
And by the end of the conversation, he said, Now that I realize you're talking about the psychology of hell and not the ontology of hell, I am in complete agreement with your video.
Right.
Because it was just a category error. He thought I was talking about what God was going to do, and I'm talking more about what people are going to do to themselves.
Okay. So, would you ever, if someone, do you think there's an active part of God's judgment? So if
Yes.
so if you were teaching in hell to a church audience per se, you might show both angles, that God actively judges that could be death, and then
Yeah, I mean, God is actively. I mean, I use the analogy, of course, of like Adam and Eve. I mean, God judged them,
hmm
but they had already decided what they wanted. They wanted to be their own lords, their own masters, and to set themselves up as a satellite center of wisdom. God was based, and so it's like as Paul says in Thessalonians, God gives people the desires of their hearts. He's going to give them what they already wanted. So yeah, God is judging them because he's ultimately the one in control. But it's also he's judging them based on what they have already decided upon. So I don't see it as incompatible at all. I just don't think I think we need to drop the traditional understanding that there are people in hell climbing up the sides going, no, 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 let me out, let me out. That's not what hell is. Hell is a place where the people who hate God go. Everyone in hell right now, as I mean hell, Hades, I guess you would define it as, is still shaking their fist at God, saying this is his fault.
right.
And my point is, no, it's not. And that's what hell is.
Okay. So in terms of maybe it's an audience thing. Maybe your video wasn't intended for me. I find it interesting because it has.
It was intended for the non-Christian. And again,
Yeah.
I hear from them all the time that's saying that was the best explanation of hell I ever heard.
Yeah.
That's who it's geared to. I'm not talking about the ontological difference between Hades and hell. I'm talking about the psychology of hell and what that means.
Cool. All right. So if we then go into, let's maybe move on from your video because I'll be quite interesting just in terms of what you've read then around this topic a little bit in the sense of how much of Gehenna Hades stuff have you looked into in terms of where you sit? I mean, you're clearly agnostic.
I've not looked a lot into it because I don't care, and I did look a lot into it years ago, and I ended up treating it the same way I treat end times prophecies.
Right.
None of you know what you're talking about. You're all throwing so much interpretation to this, and I'm just sick and tired of it. It's not doing anyone any good.
That's really interesting.
And so, like,
yeah, I'll probably have a similar view for Genesis 1. for me.
Here's how I kind of go about it: is that every Jew when Jesus was born knew exactly who the Messiah was. They knew how he was going to come, how he was going to show up, and they were all wrong. No one predicted the resurrection. No one predicted the Messiah to play out actually how it did. I think that's basically what's going to happen at the end times, and I think that's what the afterlife is going to be like in analogous fashion. We have no clue. We're getting very few hints, but what we do know the most about it is what's important, and it's our own psychology. It's about our own sin. This is going to destroy you. It's going to burn. It's going to create a hell inside of you if you don't do something. Bible, basic instruction before leaving Earth. I don't think we know a lot about the ontology of the afterlife for the same reason it's impossible to explain tennis to an ant. We know vague hints about it. But ultimately, what's most important is knowing that what sin does to us, why we need Jesus, and knowing what hell will do to us psychologically and how we are sort of creating our own hells. So, in terms of Gehenna, Hades, Shield differences, I got vague theories, but if you're going to ask me, I'm going to be like, maybe. I don't know. I've not looked too much into it because I don't think it's that important, especially for what I do on my channel.
Right. Okay. So that's completely changed how I've probably prepared for this talk because I guess this chat and which is nice. I think that's quite interesting. With where I'm at, as I said, I kind of shifted from being explaining hell in that way, but then again, I am mostly in terms of outside of YouTube. I am mostly talking to a Christian audience. I help lead a local church, and so my digging into scripture has transformed my view of God's character, in the sense of no longer holding to an eternal torment view, because of the questions. So have you interacted with non-Christians who I haven't looked at all the comments in your YouTube video for some reason. I think I've got better time. But have any of your questions been about, well, what about God sending me to eternal torture? Like, how would you, from an apologetic angle, respond to that?
I would say that God does not send you to eternal torture. God is love. So God is always going to try to give his love to us, so to speak. He's always trying to love us, make us better than what we are. And if we are in a fallen nature, we have a fallen nature, sometimes that's not going to come across in the way we would think it is. So the eternal torture that would, if hell is eternal torture, that's something the person is doing to themselves by constantly rejecting God's love and constantly trying to set themselves up as their own Lord and their own master. It's not like God is throwing lightning bolts down in hell to keep the fire going. It's something that these people are doing. So I think C.S. Lewis' depiction of the gray town is more spot on. It's people that are miserable, they hate it, but they don't want to go up to heaven, because up there they'd have to submit to someone and they couldn't do the things the way they want. And so I think it's more what the Bible is trying to get at is more of a psychological state than anything else.
Okay, so I think in terms of my apologetic response, so I'm doing, we have an Alpha course. Has Alpha made it to the States? Do you do Alpha courses?
Alpha what?
Alpha courses. They're like no, it's like an introduction to Christianity. You do a few courses and Christianity 101 type thing. Introducing.
I don't think so.
Okay, so if I was answering that question and someone comes up to me and says God doesn't torture, I'm now convinced that he doesn't torture because of biblical verses. So instead of going down the C.S. Lewis route, I'd quote John 3:16, because I find just the word perish in itself is language that people outside of the church speak. And actually, in terms of theology nerds, it's Christians that have to reinterpret perish through a filter to make it mean eternal torment, or at least eternal conscious torment. And so I guess just talking apologetics, my defense would be more John 3:16, or what you quoted earlier, Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. And I just feel like the gospel really is life or death. Christ took our death. So in terms of atonement, my shifting's made more sense. So one of the questions I always had growing up was, how does Jesus on the cross take eternal torment, the momentary instant? And you generally get, well, Jesus is infinite in humanity and therefore he can take an infinite sin.
Yeah, I don't say that, but keep going. I would agree with you here. So,
so it's all really interesting. So I guess what I was coming into this conversation, because I wouldn't go to C.S. Lewis now, just because I find the Bible clear in and of itself, that it has language that I can use the language of Jesus that says the warning very clearly in Matthew 3. I've got a note here where it's talking about you've got those that aren't in the vine are cut and thrown into the fire. And so it's quite a vivid image in and of itself. But I wouldn't. Yeah. So sorry.
Well, let me say three things about that. So one, C.S. Lewis is commenting on biblical theology. He's just trying to teach it, and I think he's very good at articulating to this generation. That's why I go there. That's why I'm using him. I'm not saying he is above Scripture. I'm saying he presents biblical theology in a very good way that's good for this generation, that's articulated to this generation. So I'm going to use some of that to help out. The second thing, when talking about Jesus on the cross, I don't think he's taking infinite, as you mentioned, the infinite eternal sin on, because the wages of sin is death. Jesus didn't have to. So Jesus basically took this, the death on cross. He took the sin regarding that. And the Bible never says the wages of sin is eternal punishment in hell.
Yeah, yeah.
So, again, hell is, for me, it's exile. It's exiled away from the presence of God. And third and finally, I mean, like, one of the things that kind of reason why I don't go into ontology of hell is because I have read, like, Jerry Walls, Dallas Willard talk about verses like this, and they give their own explanations on why it's eternal torment. All of them sound pretty good to me. Still not convinced either way. I think annihilationists make good arguments, especially if it's more like eventual annihilationism. Like something more in line with kind of what I thought C.S. Lewis was implying. But Jesus was, of course, a rabbi of his day, and he speaks in a lot of hyperbolic, metaphorical language. I mean, he taught in parables, for Christ's sake, no pun intended. And so we're not going to get a full picture, and so there's going to be a lot of interpretation that has to go into a lot of those passages.
Yeah.
What we don't have to worry about interpretation is the nature of sin, the nature of sin creating a hell in each and every one of us. That's pretty clearly presented in the Gospels. And so that's why I just tend to focus on that, and that's why I'm also agnostic about the ontological aspects of it all. Because you very well could be right, but I mean, like, what's really important? What's really important is getting people to realize what their sin is going to do to them and why they need Jesus. So that's what I focus on.
Sounds good, and that's why you've got an apologetics channel, which is doing very well. So
yeah, thank you.
Just in terms of that, and as you are a full-time ministry now, just want to recommend that people do sign up to your Patreon. I think I've got it in the link in the description. If I haven't yet, I will add it in after the live. I think you're doing a fantastic job. So in terms of my conversation with you, there is a lot of agreement. I'm not here, as I said in our private message, I'm not here to bombard you with information to say, come to my view. That's not the point. But I quite like that we're in more agreement than I initially anticipated. So,
yeah, I mean, people get kind of mad because they think, like, I'm taking a very specific view on the ontology or hell or the stages of hell, and I'm really not trying to. I don't know why people keep. Yeah. And again, it's funny. It's only the theology nerds that make that. The young believers, the nonChristians, they understand the video just fine. It's kind of ironic. It means it's working.
Yeah. Well, and as I said, the comments are. I was looking at a few of them. They are. Oh, this is explains so much to me, and the explanatory power of that is there. So, are you happy to take a few questions? I've not really looked at the chat because I keep looking away. And if we've got some in the, we'll see what we've got. I'll scroll back up. Sounds good. Yeah, whole channel on hell. I guess that's for me, Roland Burchett. It has made... So there's been a few paradigm shifts in my faith. One of them is around Genesis 1. And really reading John Walton's The Lost World of Genesis 1 basically transformed my understanding of that scripture. Not in the same way as reading about hell has for me. It just meant that I no longer argue about evolution versus young Earth. I kind of the same attitude as what Michael was sharing about the ontology of hell. I just don't find it an interesting conversation anymore, and that's not necessarily.
I know. I also don't find it pragmatic. I mean, like, it's like what are we doing? Are we really always? I mean, I was actually just at ETS. It's Evangelical Theological Seminary Conference.
Yeah.
And J.P. Moreland gave a really interesting talk on how philosophers can help scholars and theologians, and he kind of. I disagree with some of the things he said, but he kind of made a pretty good point on that. Some theologians have gotten so into their own nerdy subject, they have kind of lost touch with what people on the street need or are looking for or asking questions. And I completely agree with him on that. I think a lot of theologians have sort of done that, and unfortunately it's missing the point. Yeah. And so, when it comes to like, well, what do you mean between the difference between Hades and hell? I'm like, that's not what people where I'm at on the front, on my channel on the front lines are really caring about. So I don't get into that kind of stuff.
So I think for me, the second paradigm shift is this. So I have been a Christian, grew up Christian. I'm actually a missionary kid. My dad was out in Papua New Guinea. And so I've grown up, and I guess I have become a theology nerd. But I was always wrestling with what eternal punishment was, because I grew up with it being this eternal conscious torment. And I know that there are a lot of Christians wrestling with that. And so I guess that's what my channel is for, is people who are wrestling with that and the character of God, and then looking at how Scripture frees us from that, that idea that God will torture us forever. But also my hope is that people engage with this, that I do know it's more of an American thing, at least, that hell is like the taboo subject of I can't even say the word, evangelical churches. And so you just read Hell Under Fire. If you ever get a chance to read that, that's the main defense of the traditional view of hell. And the way that they caricatured another Christian, John Stott, a fellow Brit, who's evangelical, loves the Bible, comes to a different view like mine, and then he gets slated by the evangelical community. So my channel's really to try and open up that conversation, talk about hell, look at Scripture, find that we agree in more places than we disagree, and that's really why I've started this channel. So if that interests you, subscribe. If not, I'm not going into full-time ministry on this channel, so I'm quite happy if people join me or not. But also just I think this channel might have a shelf life. I'm just kind of seeing where it takes me and go from there.
I thought the same thing. It didn't happen.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I've been called a heretic already.
I've been called a heretic. Yeah, so at least if I'm not called a heretic once a week, I'm not doing my job properly.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean those Genesis videos you're putting out, they are pretty heretical. You got to be...
Oh, there's so much heresy. So much heresy.
Yeah, that's good. Right, let's have a look at some of these questions. It seems to me that the issue here is human philosophy of what hell is going to be like instead of relevance on Scripture. Maybe. Hi, JD.
What's the question?
He says it seems to me that the issue here is that this is mainly human philosophy of what hell is going to be like instead of relevance on Scripture.
And I would say the Bible contains philosophy. It speaks philosophical truths. It's not one or the other. Sure, there are passages that might refer to the ontological, the ontology of what's going to happen, like different stages. But the Bible's main message is, your sin is destroying you. You need Jesus. How is that, would that be incompatible with philosophy? That's a very strong philosophical claim.
Yeah, I've found that the word philosophy is like a dirty word to some, and I'm not sure if it is to JD. I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. Yeah, there's some philosophy around it, but there is actually a scriptural question there. There was, where did it say? It was something about the comment on immortality, and actually, yeah, maybe we have a little conversation about that. Someone's also speaking in script. I can't read other languages, I'm afraid. Jordan Maraki, if you can get that into English.
I don't know.
Yeah, so immortality. So the one thing I probably disagree quite strongly, or the most about, with regards to talking about around this topic, is the eternal aspect of human nature. So I guess it's talking a little bit ontology, or maybe it's biblical anthropology. I'm not quite sure, but there is John Piper said it, Tim Keller said it, CS Lewis said it, is that everyone will either live forever in heaven or live forever in hell. And I think that's why I read, just looking back at your video, I think that's why I read an eternal torment aspect into your position. What are your thoughts? Do you think we need to be accurate on that? Is that a dangerous position to start off with?
No, I mean, it's entirely possible the damned won't live forever. I don't think it's necessary. If it is the case, I tend to be more of like an eventual annihilationist. And again, anything about this is entering realm of speculation, but my I would say it might be that God, at judgment, exiles everyone, and then they have to annihilate themselves. He's not going to do it. They have to figure out how to do it without him, because God is love. He doesn't want to do that. And I like the analogy of, like, if you saw someone who was addicted, if you had a loved one who was addicted to a drug, you wouldn't be like, well, don't worry, I'm going to shoot you in the head. Everything's going to be better. You'd be like, look, I love you. I don't want you to live this way. But if you're going to, you have to just stay away from my kids and my wife. You can't be around us anymore. Go out and figure things out on your own. And I think maybe that's what God does. And maybe there is also a process available that they annihilate themselves, but they have to be the ones diving into it. It's not God picking them up and chucking them into, like, this fire that annihilate. I think it's more that God doesn't want any to perish.
Yeah.
And so the ones that are perishing are the ones who are perishing themselves. So, I mean, again, speculative.
Yeah. And in terms of the speculation, I think I would give a bit of pushback on that. Just in terms of the verses that deal with, so you got Revelation 20 where they're thrown into the lake of fire. I know there's the symbolism. Revelation is very. We need to be careful of going one verse in, but there is that language of being thrown that also Jesus uses in his parables. There's the judge. There's
and I think that would fit with my view too, because it's sort of like God does actually exile them away from his presence, but that might not be like the annihilation point. It could be that maybe that they're exiled, and there's a process by which they can, but they have to do it themselves. But again, this is also this is kind of like going down this road. It's also speculative. It's also much like, what does this one Greek word mean? Let's see how it's used in Plutarch, just so we get a better. I mean, it's like let's just step back and look at what what we do agree on. Right. Sin is bad. It's destroying us. We need Christ. Otherwise, something very bad is going to happen to those who don't take that path.
And God won't torture people forever. It's kind of the apologetic angle that I'd be leaning towards. And I am very aware that... So I guess as well where I'm at is I just want to be clear to people that I'm not speaking of the hell that they've already conjured up in their minds. So when you mention hell to a non-Christian... They've got all the cultural resources to figure out a kind of hell. And if you've watched Little Nicky, for example, that's potentially what someone's thinking. And so as Christians, we do need to be accurate in how we present the gospel. And I would say some are in danger of making hell too much a feature of their gospel presentation. And if you look in Acts, hell doesn't feature in the gospel presentations. Destruction does, and they say they've killed the author of life in Acts 3, and so it's not that I want to make hell the main feature of this presentation, of my gospel presentation, but it's the access to clear language that the Bible uses that I'm more likely to use in my presentation, so that the cultural influences are held at bay. So my language is very much, your sin will kill you. I think that's a good way of putting it. Your sin will destroy you. Your sin will remove you from God's presence. Your sin, So I guess just to clarify my view, the reason I pointed to that orthodox statement that you had is that God's presence is both fire to some, love to others. I think that's very much my view, is that as a sinner tries to approach a holy God without Christ, they will be consumed by him. And you see evidence of what consumed means from the Old Testament. And so I guess where my disagreement is, I'm not sure it's as speculative, but I do agree when speaking to non-Christians, you probably don't need to go into as much detail as some do.
I don't make a big point of it. I mean, that's why I think I would make a point about the psychology of sin that leads to hell. But I mean, I don't think someone needs to be standing on a corner with a big giant poster of flames saying you will burn if you don't accept Jesus, because that's not going to get us anywhere.
So just having a look to see if there's anything. Oh man, there's some Holographic Principle. Do you know what that is?
Yes, how does hell fit? That relates to other videos I've done arguing for the holographic principle.
Oh, right, okay.
That the universe, space-time is emergent from underlying quantum information processing, namely the wave function, the mathematical. So how would hell relate to that? So it's not like hell is necessarily a place, because outside of space-time there is no space. Hell is a state of mind. We could speak of it as a place, that people are at, but really it's the making of their own mind of where they are. So upon the death of the body, if the soul is not united with Jesus or with God, they will just simply disintegrate themselves in their own hell, in their own making, as they psychologically would, as they psychologically are doing now. So that's how it would kind of relate to it. It doesn't mean like when you die you have to move through a plane of existence to this pit which you're going to get dropped into, because outside of space-time there really is no space per se.
I'll nod like I followed that. So that to me that's you're calling some theological nerds. I'd just call that playing geeky.
Oh yeah, it's very geeky. Yeah, it's very geeky.
All right. So one question from Daniel Roger: Isn't God is love an exegetical black hole? You can almost say, make it mean anything you want. If Daniel's online, and he can clarify that in a minute. Seeing, there's a question: what is spirit?
What is spirit? It depends on how we define each of those terms. See, these are all, when people say spirit, soul, they're very colloquial. They could mean different things. Spirit is used, Paul even uses spirit in the New Testament to mean different things. Sometimes it refers to like spiritual gifts, spiritual talents, these types of things. It rarely is, I think, is actually used of any sort of like actual like essence. It's more has to do with like people's maybe personality, more about being enlightened is how he kind of uses the New Testament, if I recall what Mike Licona said about it. So it's more about being kind of in like an enlightened state. Now, is there like a spirit? Yeah, I would say there is a soul, which is what we have, which is like your soul is your personality, your thoughts, desires, your dreams. And that is obviously something that you build up over time. Like your soul will be different tomorrow, or your soul will evolve tomorrow. Then behind that, you could say there is a spirit, some sort of conscious agent, namely your mind or so, that the soul is contingent upon. So the soul is the information that makes you you, and you could say the spirit is the conscious, self-aware substance, namely, you. Again, those terms are defined differently depending on who you're talking to. That's how I would probably define them, I guess.
So I would say, in answer to questions like spirit, that is, if we're going theological black holes, that's probably one of them. I think you can say God is spirit in the sense of not being material, but I'm fairly on the fence regarding physicalism, dualism. Do we have a spirit? Do we have a soul, or are we a soul? So I think you can wrestle with that one. I'm not sure there's enough data. I think there's people that would disagree with that, but your understanding of hell doesn't rely on how we're made up as humanity. I don't think.
No, and to address an objection in the chat, I'm not saying that our final destiny is non-physical. I don't know where that came from. Obviously, the resurrection is very important, because in 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about the physical being an essential part of us. And as an idealist, I would agree with that.
Cool. I can't see too many. Oh, someone has said you have alpha in the States. You just haven't heard of it.
I probably haven't, no.
So. That's fine. So we've been going for 50 minutes or so. I'm quite happy if people haven't got any other questions.
I would just remind people, when I'm talking in the video, I'm not trying to hold to any sort of specific position. So as we know, the earlier this week, Rethinking Hell did a response to that video. And I spent a lot of time watching that, just kind of going, it's not what I said. Oh, that's not what I said again. The video kind of starts out just defining hell completely different than how I was defining hell. So it goes down this rabbit hole of just like missing the whole point of the video because he defined hell differently. And Chris is obviously a very smart guy. He spent a lot of time studying this, but didn't really get what I was trying to say there, unfortunately. I did note at one part, I stopped the video because I was like, I think he's finally getting it. It was like 37 minutes in, because he's finally starting to realize, like, he's talking about psychological aspects regarding sin. And I was like, but then he goes right back to his ontological views regarding the afterlife. And I was like, oh, well. So I would just remind people, when you read that, when you watch that video, it's about the psychology of hell. I'm not trying to take a specific view on ontology, as I've been trying to explain here. So unfortunately, I watched that video. I was like, come on, man. This is really not what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. Which is interesting. I think Chris's defense, I guess, that's the kind of angle I was about to take in terms of this video. And I guess, yeah, in terms of how we interact on YouTube, I just found it really interesting that we can talk past each other so easily. Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Chris has said in terms of the ontology of hell, though it was said in the context of disagreeing with what you presented.
Yeah.
So
Chris
Day is in the chat.
The basic thing is, when I said hell, I'm not talking about the difference between Hades. I'm talking about it generally as just separation from God. And if you start off by thinking when I'm talking about hell, I'm talking about the after final judgment, we're not on the same page. And so unfortunately it was just missing the whole point of what I was trying to say. And as I said in this whole hangout, I'm not against annihilationism necessarily. Mm-hmm. I'm not really taking a view there.
Cool. And I'm happy that that's come across. I think most people would be that. So Daniel Rogers just clarified, if you can see there, Michael used God is love as a theological framework to justify his interpretation of hell. Just doesn't see. Do you want to say anything about that? Would you say
Can you say it again? I kind of didn't hear.
Sorry, it's in the chat. Sorry, I was mumbling. I need to get used to being a better interviewer.
Yeah, I'm trying to listen to you and not just look at the chat the whole time, so I might be missing.
Michael used God is love as a theological framework to justify his interpretation of hell. It doesn't seem persuasive enough, as it can be. God is love is also used by universalists to justify their view.
And I would combat that by saying it's not really loving for God to sort of force people to go somewhere they don't even want to go. I mean, think of the old phrase, if you love someone, let them go. You don't force them to stay somewhere they don't want to be. Love is a little bit more complicated than I think universalism makes it out to be. I mean, I would like universalism to be true, but I'd say it's unlikely. But if God is love is a little bit more complicated than this warm, fuzzy feeling than we tend to think of it. I mean, you have to think of the Greek word agape and what that means. So no, I don't think that really changes anything, because it's a little bit more complicated, especially if you think of how a parent loves a child. Sometimes they have to let their child make their own choices. Even though they love them, they can't force them to be a certain way, force them to do certain things.
Cool. Yeah, I find that interesting. I've heard people say that they would want universalism to be true. I'm out on that. I find there's some very interesting universalist arguments out there. Specifically, Robin Parry's in The Four Views of Hell. His in that book is quite interesting. But I probably would. I think love needs justice, and that's, at least I would say, there's aspects of universalism that probably wouldn't be just. Any more questions? So.
No, I mean, I would just simply say that I think we need to get past the caricature versions of hell. It's not this sort of Dante's Inferno type thing. And I think that has been more damaging to our culture than anything else. And people think that hell is like this pit where demons are poking people with pitchforks and everything. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Accuracy,
yeah,
isn't it?
and that's just ridiculous nonsense. It's much more complicated. And I think it relates far more to do with our own psychological states, what we're going through a fallen nature, and what Christ is trying to do when he saves us. That's what's important.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to focus on.
Cool. I really appreciate your time. I think there's one more. No, I don't know if you want to respond to that last comment by Matt Nellen. Yeah, it says.
Let me look here. Perhaps you don't realize that Chris Date doesn't think hell ends at the point of annihilationism. Hell. I need clarification. Perhaps you don't realize that Chris Date doesn't think hell ends at the point of annihilationism.
I'm misreading that as well, Matt and Helen. If you're there, feel free to do that.
I mean, yeah. It goes back to my same point. I don't care about that because again, it's about I'm so agnostic on that stuff. Yeah. I just wanted to explain to non-believers what hell is psychologically, not what God is necessarily going to do, because I'm very agnostic on that. It's more about what we're doing to ourselves.
Okay.
And that's what's most important. So, I mean, sure, maybe. but again, that was never the aim of my video. So why would we respond in that way, I guess?
Cool. I think we're there. People can obviously engage with you on your channel, Inspiring Philosophy, on your video. I think I'm quite happy there's more agreement here. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate your time. I think we could probably go down a theological discussion on books, but I could see that you're not really wanting that, and that's not really your purpose.
Yeah, it's just not my thing. Yeah. It's like if someone tried to discuss end times prophecy stuff with me. I treat it the same way. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, and I get that, because someone brings out Genesis 1 and let's debate that, I'm probably similar to you in that, and hold a very functional view of Genesis 1, and that's cool with me. Let's talk about Christ and his resurrection and what he has done for us. And so that's kind of it. I'm happy to close it there, I guess. Thank you for coming to a channel with 50 subscribers. I don't know if that's gone up. if people want to subscribe, then that's great.
I mean, I hope so. I hope more of my subscribers will come here and subscribe to these smaller channels, because I want to see them build up more.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I really do. And hopefully we'll interact a bit more online. And as I said, I really enjoy your channel, enjoy your stuff, and look forward to seeing you do more, and more debates, and more with classic lines like, I've been studying this for 20 years.
I know. I probably won't do any more videos on hell, because I just did the one.
Yeah.
Upcoming, I got some videos on ancient monotheism upcoming, and then some videos on regional flood archaeology and geology. So I'll be covering that soon.
Cool. I look forward to it. And for everyone in the chat, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your questions. Sorry if we missed any. And feel free to comment on the video if you have any further questions. I'll interact with you there. And thanks again. And you're going for it. I'll let you finish.
No, you're good.
Cool. All right. Cheers, Michael. Nice to meet you. And we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Cool.